The sharp crack of laughter echoed through the empty parking lot as Officers Riley and Bowen tightened the coarse rope around the man's wrists and torso. Their grins stretched wide, smug and twisted with satisfaction, as the tall, broad-shouldered figure strained slightly against the bindings. His dark suit, once immaculate, was now streaked with mud and dust, a stark contrast to the clean-cut image he had carried just hours before. Beneath his long coat, hidden from view, lay the one thing that could reveal his true identity. "You like playing the hero, huh?" Riley sneered, pulling the rope tighter with a jerk. "Bet you won't feel so tough after tonight," Bowen added, chuckling as he pulled out his phone. "Let's get a picture for the guys. Something to remember this by." The man said nothing, his dark eyes locked onto them, calm and unflinching. "What's the matter? Got nothing to say?" Riley taunted, leaning in close. "Cat got your tongue? Or maybe you're just realizing this ain't your kind of town." Neither officer recognized the quiet authority in his gaze, the composed way he carried himself despite the circumstances. All they saw was what they expected to see: a black man in the wrong place at the wrong time. Riley raised his phone, snapping a few photos while Bowen gave the man a hard jab to the chest with his finger. "Smile for the camera, Chief," Bowen jeered, unaware of the irony laced in his words. Finally, the man broke his silence. His voice, though soft, carried the weight of command. "You're making a mistake." Riley's smile faltered, and he took a small step back. "What did you just say?" Riley asked, narrowing his eyes. The man met their gaze head-on, unshaken. "I said you're making a mistake, but if you act quickly, I might just forget this ever happened." Bowen laughed dismissively, his voice dripping with mockery. "Oh yeah? And just who do you think you are?" The man paused, letting the weight of the moment settle around them like a heavy fog. Then, with the same calm tone, he answered, "I'm your new chief of police." The parking lot fell into stunned silence. Riley and Bowen exchanged nervous glances, their previous confidence draining from their faces. From the shadows at the far end of the lot, the steady rhythm of approaching footsteps broke the tension. A beam of light cut through the darkness. "Chief Walker?" A voice called out, disbelief etched into every syllable. Riley's face went pale. Officer Grady stepped closer, his flashlight catching the rope still binding the man to the metal post, his stunned gaze bouncing between the scene and the two officers responsible. "What the hell is going on here?" Grady demanded, his voice tight with alarm. Before Riley or Bowen could stammer out a response, the man in question, Chief Marcus Walker, pushed himself upright as much as the ropes allowed. His eyes locked onto Grady's. "Right on time," Walker said coolly. Grady rushed forward, fumbling with the rope as he hurried to untie him. The thick tension that hung in the night air was palpable. Once the last knot was freed, Walker straightened his jacket and brushed the dirt from his sleeves. His calm eyes turned to Riley and Bowen, their stiff postures betraying the panic brewing beneath the surface. Walker's voice carried an icy calm. "Officer Riley, what's your badge number?" Riley opened his mouth to answer but stammered, unable to form coherent words. Bowen took a slow step back, his gaze darting toward the empty street, as if contemplating making a run for it. "Stop," Walker ordered sharply, and Bowen froze in place. Walker glanced at Grady. "Call the station, let them know I'm bringing 2 officers in for disciplinary review." Grady gave a stiff nod, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for his radio. Walker's gaze returned to the 2 officers, his expression unreadable, but heavy with unspoken judgment. "You think this is funny?" Walker asked in a voice so low it barely rose above a whisper. "We'll see who's laughing tomorrow." Riley and Bowen stood paralyzed, their confidence shattered under the weight of their mistake. Walker took a step closer, his tone lowering even further, though no less dangerous. "Tonight, you tied up the wrong man," he said, his words slicing through the night like a knife. "And by tomorrow, everyone will know." Earlier that day, the quiet town of Brierwood had gone about its usual routines, its streets bustling with life, unaware of the storm that was brewing just beneath the surface. Marcus Walker had only recently arrived in town, stepping into the role of chief of police. Known for his unwavering principles and dedication to justice, Walker had been tasked with cleaning up a department riddled with accusations of misconduct and prejudice. Rather than make his presence known with grand announcements, Walker chose a different approach, slipping into town quietly to observe the department from the shadows. He wanted to see how his officers behaved when they thought no one was watching. And by the looks of it, he hadn't liked what he found. The orange glow of streetlights flickered as officers Riley and Bowen wrapped up their shift, lingering near the station's entrance. Bowen leaned against the hood of their cruiser, eyes lazily scanning the quiet streets of Brierwood. "Hey, check that guy out," Riley muttered, nudging Bowen with his elbow. His gaze followed a lone figure crossing Main Street. Bowen squinted. "Yeah, looks like he doesn't belong." His voice carried the same suspicion. "Let's see what he's up to," Riley suggested, pushing off the cruiser. Their boots crunched against the gravel as they followed the man, their assumptions tightening like a vice. With each step, their biases hardened into quiet justification. By the time they caught up to him in the parking lot, authority had morphed into arrogance, and things spiraled out of control. By morning, Brierwood was humming with whispers. Calls flooded the station, rumors spreading like wildfire. The town, usually calm, had shifted overnight. By noon, the entire force was bracing for what came next. Chief Marcus Walker sat in his office, the glow from the morning sun filtering through the blinds. On his desk lay 2 personnel files, Riley's and Bowen's, both open to long pages of notes and disciplinary warnings. Next to them sat the department's code of conduct, its edges worn from frequent reference. Sticky notes marked specific passages. Walker's fingers tapped against the desk, his expression unreadable. This was just the beginning. Outside the chief's office, the station buzzed with uneasy energy. Officers clustered in corners, their hushed conversations darting between speculation and concern. The tension pressed down on the building like heavy fog. A knock pulled Walker's attention away from the files. "Come in," he called, his tone steady. Sergeant Doug Wheeler stepped inside, his weathered face lined with concern. The longest-serving officer in the department, Wheeler had seen his share of storms. "Chief," Wheeler began cautiously, shifting his weight. "The officers, they're getting restless. They've heard about what happened last night." Walker leaned back in his chair, nodding. "Good," he replied simply. "They should know. Riley and Bowen are in the briefing room. Let them wait. A little nervousness will do them some good." Wheeler hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. "Chief, not everyone's like them. There are good people on this force. They want to see things change." Walker's hardened gaze softened briefly. "I know, Sergeant, and I'll make sure those good ones have nothing to fear. But the bad apples? They're done." Wheeler gave a quiet nod and exited, leaving Walker alone with the files. The briefing room felt stifling. Riley's leg bounced under the table while Bowen repeatedly glanced at the clock. "Think he's really gonna fire us?" Bowen whispered, eyes darting toward the door. "Shut up, man," Riley snapped, gripping the edge of the table. "We don't even know what he's planning." The door swung open. Chief Walker entered without a word, the weight of his presence filling the room. Riley and Bowen immediately straightened, eyes fixed forward. Walker crossed the room slowly, stopping at the head of the table. He placed a thick folder down, flipping it open to reveal crisp photographs. The images glared up at them, photos of Walker tied to the pole the night before. The harsh light from Bowen's phone flash reflected off his face, captured in stark detail. Riley's face drained of color. "Chief, Save it," Walker cut in, his voice low and even. He picked up one of the photos, holding it up for emphasis. "This is what you thought was funny?" Riley swallowed hard. Bowen's lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Walker's dark eyes narrowed. "You humiliated a man you didn't even bother to identify. Why?" Neither officer could meet his gaze. "Because I didn't look like I belonged?" Walker's voice sharpened, slicing through the room. Riley shifted uncomfortably. "It was just a misunderstanding, sir." Walker's expression hardened further, his tone dropping to a quiet intensity. "A misunderstanding? You tied me to a pole, took pictures, laughed, and now you think calling it a misunderstanding will make it go away?" Bowen finally found his voice, though it trembled. "Chief, we didn't mean any harm. We didn't know." "That's the problem," Walker replied coldly, slamming the photo down onto the table. "You didn't know, and you didn't care enough to find out." Silence pressed down on them, broken only by the distant hum of the station's heating vents. Walker's gaze lingered on them like a weight neither could shake. "Effective immediately," Walker continued, his voice calm but firm. "Both of you are suspended without pay. An internal investigation will determine if you keep your badges." Riley and Bowen's faces twisted with shock. Walker's chair scraped lightly against the floor as he rose to his feet. "You can go now," he added, his tone leaving no room for argument. Riley hesitated, as if waiting for a lifeline that never came. Bowen stood stiffly, his eyes glued to the floor. Walker watched as they shuffled out of the room, their heads low. As the door clicked shut behind them, Walker returned to his desk. He opened their files once more, this time flipping to the final pages. This was just the beginning. The heavy door of the briefing room closed behind Officers Riley and Bowen, their footsteps echoing down the hallway like distant thunder. Their faces were pale, weighed down by the consequences of their actions. Chief Marcus Walker stood at the head of the table, watching them leave with an expression that revealed nothing. By noon, the story had spread like wildfire. Brierwood's local press seized on the incident, their headlines blazing across every screen and newspaper. "Racist scandal rocks Brierwood PD, new chief takes swift action." At Mason's Diner, a staple gathering spot for locals, conversations buzzed as patrons exchanged opinions over coffee and breakfast plates. "I heard the new chief doesn't mess around," a man muttered, stirring his drink. "About time someone straightened things out." Across the counter, a woman shook her head disapprovingly. "What kind of place have we become if our own officers can't be trusted?" she said quietly. "It's embarrassing." In the far corner, seated near the window, a young woman named Danielle Rise scrolled through the news on her phone. A lifelong resident of Brierwood, Danielle had seen the town's shadows long before this, but something about this felt different. "This town's about to change," she murmured under her breath. That evening, as Chief Walker prepared to leave the station, his phone buzzed on the desk. The number flashing on the screen was unfamiliar. Frowning, Walker answered. Before he could speak, a distorted voice cut through the static. "You think you're a hero, Chief?" the voice rasped. "Think you can come in here and ruin lives?" Walker's grip on the phone tightened. He stayed silent, listening. "You don't belong here," the voice continued. "Back off, or you'll regret it." The line went dead. Walker lowered the phone slowly, his pulse steady but his mind racing. Someone was watching him, and they had no intention of letting him clean up the department without a fight. He sat in his dimly lit office for several moments, the weight of the call settling over him like a thick fog. As an outsider stepping into Brierwood's fractured police force, Walker knew there would be resistance. But this was something else. Whoever was behind that call wasn't just angry, they were ready to escalate. Walker leaned back in his chair, exhaling as he gathered his thoughts. His instincts screamed that this wasn't an idle threat. Reaching for his desk phone, Walker dialed a familiar extension. "Sergeant Wheeler," Walker said when Wheeler answered. "I need you to trace an incoming call. Just came through on my cell. It's concerning." Wheeler's voice was calm but serious. "Understood, Chief. I'll get on it right away." "Everything all right?" "I'm fine," Walker replied, though the words felt hollow. "Just let me know what you find." His mind was already working, piecing together who in town might be connected to the call. He suspected someone inside the department, or someone with ties to it. Either way, Walker wasn't about to back down. The next morning, the station was unusually quiet. Officers moved through the halls with hushed conversations and uneasy glances toward Walker's office. The shift in atmosphere was palpable. Walker arrived early, stepping into his office as the first rays of sunlight cut across the room. A soft knock sounded at the door. "Come in," Walker called. Sergeant Wheeler stepped inside, a folder in hand. His brow was creased with concern. "Chief," Wheeler began, shutting the door behind him. "I traced the call." Walker sat forward, eyes locking on the folder. "It came from a burner phone," Wheeler said. "No way to trace who used it." Walker's lips tightened into a thin line. "Not surprising. Thank you, Sergeant. Keep this between us for now." Wheeler nodded but hesitated. "You think this is connected to what happened last night?" Walker considered the question carefully. "It's possible," he admitted, "but it could also be someone who doesn't like the changes I'm bringing to this town." Wheeler shifted, concern flickering across his features. Chief, I've lived here long enough to know, when Brierwood doesn't like change, things can get ugly. Walker met his gaze, leaning forward slightly. Let them plan, Walker said, his voice calm but resolute. I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to do the job. And I'll see it through, no matter what. Later that day, Walker called a department-wide meeting. Officers filed into the briefing room, their faces a mixture of curiosity and unease. Riley and Bowen's absence was glaring, a reminder to everyone of the consequences of crossing the new chief. Walker stood at the front of the room, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. Last night, Walker began, I received a threat. Someone in this town, or in this department, thinks they can intimidate me into backing down. The room fell into an uneasy silence. Walker's tone remained steady, cutting through the tension like a blade. Let me be clear, that will not happen. All eyes were locked on him, the weight of his words hanging in the air. This department has been under a cloud for too long, Walker continued. I was brought here to fix that, and I intend to. A few officers shifted uncomfortably, but no one dared speak. If any of you have a problem with that, Walker added, his eyes sharp, you're free to turn in your badge. His gaze swept across the room, daring anyone to challenge him. No one moved. Walker nodded, satisfied. The people of Brierwood deserve better, he concluded. And starting today, that's exactly what they'll get. Chief Marcus Walker's eyes swept across the room, daring anyone to challenge him. The officers remained silent, shifting uncomfortably in their seats but unwilling to meet his gaze. The people of Brierwood deserve better, Walker said firmly. And we're going to give it to them. That starts now. He let the weight of his words settle before dismissing the room. One by one, the officers filed out, their expressions guarded and unreadable. Walker watched them go, knowing some would resist the changes he was implementing. But he also knew there were good officers among them. He just needed to find them. That evening, as Walker drove home through the winding streets of Brierwood, he noticed a car trailing him. At first, he brushed it off as coincidence. But after several turns, the vehicle remained behind him, its headlights lingering just a little too long in his rearview mirror. Walker tightened his grip on the steering wheel, making a sharp turn down a quieter street. The car hesitated at the corner before continuing to follow. His pulse steady, Walker pulled into a brightly lit gas station and parked near the entrance. The other vehicles slowed as it passed, but as Walker stepped out of his car, it sped off into the night. Walker watched it disappear, his face unreadable. He memorized the car's make and model, mentally filing it away. Someone was testing him, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. The next morning, as Walker stepped out onto his porch, his breath caught for just a second. His car, parked neatly in the driveway, was vandalized. Shattered glass littered the ground, and across the hood, in thick red spray paint, was one word: leave. Walker's eyes scanned the quiet neighborhood, but the street was empty. He clenched his jaw, stepping closer to inspect the damage. This wasn't just a warning, it was a challenge. Whoever had done this wasn't just trying to scare him. They wanted him gone. Walker pulled out his phone and snapped a series of photos, his expression hardening with each click of the camera. Then he dialed Sergeant Doug Wheeler. Wheeler, Walker said as soon as the sergeant answered, I need a patrol car at my house. My car's been vandalized. This just escalated. I'm on it, Chief, Wheeler replied without hesitation. You all right? I'm fine, Walker answered. Just get someone here as soon as you can. Within 10 minutes, a patrol car pulled up in front of Walker's house. Officer Jessica Reyes, one of the newer recruits, stepped out. She approached cautiously, her eyes widening as she took in the damage. Chief, this is serious, Reyes said quietly, surveying the shattered windows. It's meant to be, Walker replied. I want a full report. Take photos, log everything. This needs to be on record. Reyes nodded, quickly getting to work. As Walker watched her carefully document the scene, he noted the determination in her expression. She didn't flinch. That was a good sign. Later that day, Walker convened a private meeting with Wheeler and Reyes in his office. The photos of his vandalized car lay spread across the table between them. This isn't just about me, Walker said, tapping his finger on one of the images. This is about control. Someone or a group of people doesn't want this department to change. They're willing to escalate to keep things exactly as they are. Wheeler leaned forward, his brow furrowed. You think it's someone inside the department? Walker's eyes narrowed. It's possible, but it could also be someone with influence in town. Reyes hesitated. Chief, if they're willing to do this, what's stopping them from going further? Walker met her gaze. Nothing, he said plainly. That's why we need to stay ahead of them. He outlined his plan, an increase in patrols around his house, random checks on officers, and quiet surveillance of suspicious activity in town. They would gather evidence quietly, without tipping anyone off. This isn't just pushback, Walker said, his voice low and firm. This is war, and we're going to fight it our way, without fear or hesitation. Over the next few days, Walker buried himself in his work. He met with community leaders, reviewed department protocols, and made his presence known at public gatherings. His face became a constant in Brierwood, a reminder that he wasn't going anywhere. But the threats didn't stop. Late one evening, as Walker reviewed case files in his office, the front desk officer, Tony Sanders, knocked hesitantly on his door. Chief, Sanders said, his face pale, something just came in for you. Sanders placed a small package on Walker's desk. It had no return address and was marked urgent. Walker's eyes narrowed. He carefully unwrapped it, revealing a single item, a black envelope containing a note. 3 simple words were scrawled in red ink, "You were warned." Walker's grip tightened on the paper. He exhaled slowly, setting the note down as his phone buzzed with a text from Wheeler. Anything new? Walker glanced at the note one last time before typing back. Yeah, and it's not over. Officer Tony Sanders placed the small, nondescript package on Chief Marcus Walker's desk. Walker eyed it carefully, his instincts sharpening. The weight in the room shifted. Something wasn't right. Chief? Sanders asked, watching Walker's expression. Walker nodded, keeping his voice calm. Thank you, officer. That'll be all. Once Sanders left, Walker carefully opened the package. Inside, a single bullet lay nestled in black fabric. A folded note accompanied it. Walker's face hardened as he unfolded the paper. 3 words were scrawled in harsh, jagged handwriting. Time's running out. Walker's grip tightened. He picked up the phone and dialed Sergeant Doug Wheeler's extension. Wheeler, Walker said, his voice firm. I need you in my office now. Minutes later, Wheeler entered. His eyes immediately narrowed as they fell on the bullet and note sitting ominously on the desk. This just came in? Wheeler asked, his tone low. Walker nodded. This is escalating fast, Wheeler muttered. I know, Walker replied, his gaze cold. Get this to forensics. I want every inch checked for prints, fibers, anything. I'm on it, Wheeler said, carefully wrapping the package. That night, as Walker drove home in a station-issued car, his phone buzzed beside him. Glancing at the screen, he noticed the sender was anonymous. He pulled over beneath a flickering streetlight and opened the message. It was a video. Walker pressed play. The shaky footage showed his house from a distance. The camera zoomed in slowly on the large front window. Inside, his wife Natalie and their daughter Ella were visible, laughing, unaware of the silent threat watching them. As the video ended, a message appeared on the screen. You think you're untouchable? Think again. Walker's heart pounded, but his hands remained steady. He hit redial, calling Natalie immediately. Her voice came through cheerfully. Hey, honey, on your way home? Walker kept his tone calm despite the rising dread. Natalie, listen to me. Lock all the doors and windows. Make sure Ella stays away from the front of the house. There was a pause. Marcus, what's going on? I'll explain when I get home. Just do it now. Her voice dropped, serious and concerned. All right, be careful. I will, Walker replied, ending the call. He exhaled deeply, pushing back the panic. There was no room for it now. As he pulled back onto the road, he dialed Wheeler again. Doug, Walker said, his voice clipped. I need a unit posted outside my house. Discreet, but they need to stay there all night. You got it, Chief. Everything okay? Wheeler asked. No, Walker admitted, but it will be. When Walker arrived home, Natalie was waiting at the door. Her face was pale but composed. She ushered him inside, glancing toward Ella, who sat quietly on the couch, clutching a stuffed bear. Walker knelt beside his daughter, forcing a small smile. Hey, sweetheart. Everything's fine, just a little trouble at work, he said gently. Nothing for you to worry about. Ella nodded, but her eyes betrayed her concern. Walker kissed her forehead and stood, guiding Natalie into the kitchen. He pulled out his phone and showed her the video. Natalie's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Who would do this? Someone who doesn't want me here, Walker said quietly. They think they can scare me off, but they crossed a line. Natalie's initial shock faded, replaced by fierce determination. What do we do? Walker placed a reassuring hand over hers. I've got officers watching the house, but if this escalates, I'm sending you and Ella somewhere safe. Natalie's grip tightened around his hand. We'll get through this, together. Walker nodded. Yeah, we will. The next morning at the station, Walker gathered Wheeler and Officer Jessica Reyes for a private meeting. He played the video for them. Reyes's jaw tightened as she watched, while Wheeler exhaled sharply, shaking his head. This is personal now, Walker said, his voice cool but edged with restrained anger. Whoever this is knows exactly how to hurt me, but they've made a mistake. Reyes leaned forward. Chief, we can't wait for them to strike again. We need to take the offensive. Walker nodded. I agree. We're launching a full investigation, every lead, every piece of suspicious activity in town. No stone unturned. He glanced at Wheeler. I want patrols increased around key areas, and I want this community to feel safe. Wheeler nodded. We're with you, Chief. We'll find out who's behind this. That afternoon, Walker sat alone in his office, poring over personnel files and town records. He had requested every major incident from the last 5 years, hoping to find patterns or names that resurfaced too frequently. His desk was cluttered with papers when Sanders knocked, poking his head in cautiously. Chief, there's something at the front desk for you. Another package, Sanders said uneasily. Walker's eyes darkened. Bring it in. Chief Marcus Walker sat hunched over his desk, surrounded by stacks of personnel files and records of incidents involving the Brierwood Police Department over the past 5 years. His eyes scanned each line carefully, searching for patterns or names that might tie into the threats looming over his family and department. The steady hum of the station lights was the only sound filling the room, until his phone vibrated against the desk. Walker glanced at the screen. A new text message. Check your email. Walker's heart sank as he opened his laptop. His inbox flashed with an unread message titled, Time's Running Out. Attached was a single image. Walker froze. It was a photo of his daughter, Ella, taken that very morning as she walked into school. The simmering rage beneath Walker's calm exterior threatened to erupt. He stood abruptly, pacing the length of his office as he dialed Sergeant Doug Wheeler. The line picked up on the second ring. Chief? Wheeler's voice was alert. They're watching my family, Doug, Walker said, his voice tight with restrained anger. They sent a picture of Ella this morning. Silence lingered for a moment before Wheeler cursed under his breath. They're getting desperate, Chief. Walker nodded, even though Wheeler couldn't see him. Lock the town down if we have to. We might not have a choice. Get Reyes and meet me in the war room. We're going to map out every lead. Understood? Wheeler replied. Walker hung up, gripping the edge of his desk to steady himself. Just as he did, the station plunged into darkness. The hum of the fluorescent lights vanished, replaced by an unsettling silence. Seconds later, the emergency lights flickered on, casting long shadows through the hallways in a dull red glow. Walker stepped into the corridor, noting the tension etched across the faces of the officers scrambling to adjust. Chief? Officer Jessica Reyes jogged toward him, her face tense. We've got a situation. She led him to the front desk, where a handwritten note sat ominously beneath the faint emergency lights. You can't protect everyone. Walker picked it up, studying the crude handwriting, his jaw clenched as the weight of the words settled over him. Sergeant Carter, Walker called across the room, his voice cut through the murmurs of uncertainty. Yes, Chief? Carter stepped forward. Do we have any idea how this note got here? Walker asked, holding the paper between his fingers. Carter shook his head. Nothing yet. The front desk clerk stepped away for just a minute. No one saw anyone come in. Walker processed the information quickly. Get surveillance footage from all station cameras. If someone slipped in, we'll find them. Carter nodded, signaling for a tech team to retrieve the footage. Walker turned to Reyes. Put the station on lockdown. No one enters or leaves without clearance. Understood, Chief, Reyes replied, determination hardening her features. As the station slowly regained power, the unease lingered. Walker gathered Carter, Reyes, and a few trusted officers in the war room, the soft hum of computer monitors filling the tense silence. Carter pulled up grainy surveillance footage on the screen, rewinding to the moment the note appeared. There, Carter pointed. 11:03 p.m., the desk clerk steps away. Seconds later, a shadowy figure slipped in from the side entrance, face obscured beneath a hoodie. "Pause it," Walker ordered, leaning in. "Can you enhance the frame?" Carter worked quickly, zooming in on the figure as they momentarily turned toward the camera. But the grainy quality and poor lighting revealed little more than the vague outline of someone familiar. "Damn," Carter muttered. "Still can't make out a face." "They're taunting us," Reyes said, breaking the silence. "Whoever this is, they want us to know they can reach us anytime." Walker straightened, his eyes cold but unwavering. "Let them try. Double the patrols tonight. I want eyes on every vulnerable spot in town. If they so much as breathe in the wrong direction, I want to know about it." Later that night, Walker returned home to find 2 patrol cars discreetly stationed at opposite ends of his street. Their headlights flicked off, blending into the darkness. Inside, Natalie was waiting, her arms crossed. "Anything new?" she asked softly as Walker set his briefcase down by the door. "They left a note at the station," Walker replied. "But we're tightening security. They won't catch us off guard." Natalie nodded, though worry flickered behind her eyes. "And Ella?" "She's safe," Walker assured her. "We'll keep it that way." Walker spent the night in the living room, his police scanner humming softly beside him. Every creak in the house sharpened his senses, but the night passed without incident. By morning, Walker felt a renewed resolve settle over him. Whoever was behind this was relentless, but they hadn't broken him yet, and they wouldn't. The next morning, Chief Marcus Walker stood at the front of Brierwood City Hall meeting room, addressing the town's mayor and key community leaders. The air was thick with murmurs of concern, the tension unmistakable. Faces around the room reflected unease, some curious, others worried. "Thank you all for coming," Walker began, his voice calm but resolute. "As some of you may have heard, there have been escalating threats directed at my family and me. But this isn't just about us, it's about the future of Brierwood." The room fell silent. Walker continued, his gaze sweeping the faces before him. "For too long, certain people in this town have acted as if they were above the law. My role here is to change that. But I can't do it alone." The mayor, Robert Alden, a sharp-eyed man in his early 50s, leaned forward. "What do you need from us, Chief?" "Support," Walker replied plainly. "We need the community to stand united. If we're going to root out corruption and intimidation, it has to be clear. We do it together. There's no room for division." A quiet ripple of agreement passed through the room, though Walker noted a few hesitant glances. Mr. Franklin, a grizzled business owner, crossed his arms as he spoke. "Chief, some folks around here don't like change. You shake things up too much, and you'll make enemies. A lot of people are comfortable with the way things are." Walker's expression didn't waver. "Good," he replied, "because comfort is exactly what we need to disrupt." The meeting concluded with a general agreement, though Walker could feel the lingering doubt as he stepped outside. Across the street, a black SUV idled, its tinted windows concealing the driver. Walker's eyes narrowed. Even from a distance, he felt the weight of the gaze behind the glass. The SUV didn't move as he approached his car, though every step made Walker's muscles tighten. His phone buzzed in his pocket, just as he unlocked the door. A text message flashed on the screen. "You can't stop us, Chief. Watch your back." Walker's eyes flicked up, but the SUV was already pulling away into traffic. He clenched his jaw as he slipped into the driver's seat. Whoever was behind these threats had escalated. It wasn't just intimidation anymore. This was a declaration of war. But if they wanted a war, Walker was ready to fight. Back at the station, Walker wasted no time. He called for an emergency meeting with Sergeant Wheeler, Officer Jessica Reyes, and a handful of the most trusted officers. The war room felt heavy with anticipation as they gathered. Walker placed his phone on the table, displaying the ominous message. "They're watching us," he said, his tone sharp. "Tracking our moves, and now they're bold enough to make contact in broad daylight." Wheeler's eyes darkened. "What's the next step?" Walker unrolled a map of Brierwood across the table, marking key locations where recent incidents had occurred. "We've been on the defensive. That ends now," Walker stated. "We're going to find them and shut them down." Reyes nodded. Where do we start? Walker pointed at the location where the SUV had last been seen. First, we track the black SUV. Reyes, I need you to pull traffic footage from every intersection near City Hall. Cross-reference it with footage near the station. I'm on it, Reyes said, already opening her laptop. Walker turned to Wheeler. Coordinate with forensics. I want the note from last night analyzed. Prints, fibers, anything. Even the smallest lid can break this open. Understood, Wheeler replied, his face set with determination. Walker's eyes swept over the team. We're dealing with someone who knows how to stay hidden. But no one is invisible forever. Everyone makes mistakes. We're going to find theirs. A few hours later, Reyes called Walker and Wheeler into the surveillance room. I found something, she said, pointing to the screen. The footage displayed the black SUV parked near City Hall. After Walker's meeting, it followed him for several blocks before diverting course. Reyes traced its route backward, tracking it through various intersections until it led to the outskirts of town. This is where things get interesting, she said, pulling up additional footage. The SUV entered the parking lot of an old industrial warehouse. It lingered for several minutes before disappearing inside. Walker's gaze narrowed. What about the plates? Fake, Reyes replied. But the warehouse itself is registered to a shell company. I'm digging into its ownership now. Walker's mind churned through possibilities. Whoever was behind this had resources. Good work, Walker said. Wheeler crossed his arms. What's the move, Chief? We could get a warrant and raid the place tonight. Walker shook his head. Not yet. If they're watching us, they'll see it coming. We need to be careful. I want surveillance on that building immediately. Plainclothes officers only. I'll handle it, Reyes said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Walker glanced at the footage one last time, his eyes lingering on the dark warehouse. We've got a lead, he muttered under his breath. Now let's see where it takes us. That night, Chief Marcus Walker and Officer Jessica Reyes conducted covert surveillance at the old warehouse on the outskirts of Brierwood. Dressed in plain clothes, they parked a distance away, blending into the shadows. Through binoculars, Walker scanned the building's perimeter. It appeared quiet, too quiet. Reyes adjusted her seat, her gaze fixed on the side entrance. Chief, she whispered, nudging him. There's movement. Walker shifted his binoculars to where she pointed. A man in a dark hoodie stepped outside, flicking open a lighter and taking a long drag from a cigarette. He lingered near the door for a few minutes, surveying the lot before slipping back inside. Walker lowered his binoculars. We've got people inside, he said grimly. Let's see who else shows up. For hours, they watched as figures came and went. Some stayed longer, others briefly exchanged something at the door. Each movement was catalogued in Walker's mind, every face, car, and pattern committed to memory. Near midnight, the warehouse fell silent. The last light flickered off, and the flow of activity ceased. We've seen enough, Walker said, starting the engine. Let's regroup and plan the next steps. The following morning, Walker dialed an old contact, FBI Special Agent Douglas Harper. Marcus, Harper answered, his voice calm but curious. Been a while. Walker wasted no time. Doug, I need a favor. There's been a series of threats, and I believe a warehouse outside of town is connected. Harper's tone grew serious. You're walking a fine line. If these people are as dangerous as they sound, one wrong move could make things worse. I know, Walker replied, but I need resources, anything you can spare. This won't end quietly. Harper sighed. I'll see what I can do. But Marcus, watch your back. These kinds of people don't play by the rules. Later that afternoon, as Walker reviewed the surveillance notes, the station shook violently. The thunderous boom of an explosion rattled the windows, followed by the distant sound of glass shattering. Walker bolted upright as Sergeant Doug Wheeler burst into the office, coughing through the dust. Chief? It's the parking lot. Walker grabbed his jacket and sprinted outside. What awaited him was a charred patrol car, reduced to twisted, smoldering metal. Firefighters arrived moments later, spraying foam over the wreckage, but the damage had been done. Walker's stomach turned. This wasn't a warning anymore. It was an attack. As the smoke drifted into the night sky, Mayor Robert Alden pushed through the crowd, his face pale with anger and concern. Marcus, Alden called, stopping beside him. What the hell is going on? Walker's eyes didn't leave the destroyed vehicle. An attack. Someone sending a message. This is outrageous, Alden said, shaking his head. The town's already on edge. If this spreads, it could spiral. Walker turned to him, his voice firm. Word's already out, Mayor. We need to act before it escalates further. Alden hesitated, glancing at the onlookers gathering behind the caution tape. What's your next move? Walker didn't hesitate. We're going to find out who's behind this and shut them down. That evening, Walker gathered his most trusted officers in the war room. Wheeler, Reyes, and a handful of others stood around a large map of Brierwood, red markers pinpointing key locations. Here's where we stand, Walker began, tapping a spot on the map. We've confirmed the warehouse is a hub for their operations. Tonight, we go in. Wheeler raised an eyebrow. A raid? Walker nodded. But not a standard one. We move quietly, take them by surprise. I've spoken to Harper. His team will provide backup if things go south. Reyes leaned forward. How do we know they won't see us coming? Walker's eyes hardened. We don't, but waiting any longer isn't an option. They're getting bolder, and this, he gestured toward the photos of the destroyed patrol car, proves it. As the night deepened, Walker's team geared up, preparing for the operation. They arrived at the warehouse just past midnight, approaching in silence. Walker led the charge, his footsteps light against the gravel. From the shadows, he signaled Reyes and Wheeler to flank the side entrances. Walker took a breath, gripping his sidearm. The door creaked slightly as they pushed inside, the faint hum of machinery vibrating through the floor. Inside, crates lined the walls, and faint voices echoed from a room at the far end of the building. Walker gestured for his team to move forward. Suddenly, one of the voices grew louder. Who's there? Walker froze, pressing against the wall. A figure stepped out, his silhouette illuminated by a flickering bulb overhead. Before the man could react, Wheeler grabbed him from behind, pinning him to the floor as Reyes secured his weapon. Clear, Wheeler whispered. Walker pressed on, leading them deeper inside. By the time they reached the far room, several individuals had been detained, faces Walker recognized from their earlier surveillance. Walker approached one of the captives, crouching beside him. Who's behind this? Walker demanded. The man sneered but said nothing. Walker leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. You bombed my station. My officers. You think this ends here? The man's smirk faltered slightly, but he remained silent. Walker stood, turning to Wheeler. Take them in. We'll get them to talk back at the station. As the officers rounded up the suspects, Walker stepped outside for a moment, staring into the stillness of the night. The attack had raised the stakes. But now, Walker had something he hadn't before. Leverage. As night descended over Brierwood, Chief Marcus Walker and his team moved in near silence, unmarked vehicles rolling slowly toward the warehouse at the edge of town. The industrial district lay quiet, save for the distant hum of machinery and the groan of rusted metal. Walker and Officer Jessica Reyes led the group, their steps light as they positioned themselves outside the building. Everyone in position? Walker whispered into his radio. Ready? Sergeant Doug Wheeler's voice crackled in reply. Move, Walker ordered. The team breached the warehouse in swift, synchronized motions, weapons drawn. Inside, the dimly lit space was cluttered with crates and equipment. A handful of figures froze in place, their faces flashing with panic as officers stormed in. Police! Don't move, Reyes shouted. Chaos erupted. One suspect bolted toward the exit but was tackled by Wheeler. Another fumbled for a weapon, but Walker's shot grazed his shoulder, disarming him instantly. Within minutes, the room was secure. The suspect sat cuffed on the cold concrete floor, faces tense with defiance. Walker crouched in front of one, a wiry man with sharp eyes and a scar across his cheek. Who's running this operation? Walker asked, his voice low and dangerous. The man glared back silently. You think this is a game? Walker leaned in closer. Bombing police property puts you in a whole new category of trouble. For a fleeting second, the suspect's mask of defiance wavered, but he said nothing. Take them in, Walker ordered, stepping back. They'll talk at the station. As his team loaded the detainees into patrol cars, Walker's radio crackled to life with a frantic message. Chief, we've got a situation at the station. Walker's heart tightened. What's going on? There's been another explosion, this time inside the building. The holding cells are compromised. We have injured officers. Walker's jaw clenched. We're on our way. The drive back to the station felt like an eternity. Every second dragged heavier than the last. When Walker arrived, the sight before him made his stomach drop. Smoke poured from the side of the station, lights flashing as paramedics tended to wounded officers. The air smelled of scorched metal and ash. Walker jumped out of his car, eyes scanning the scene. "Wheeler, get me a full damage report," Walker barked. "Yes, Chief," Wheeler shouted, already moving. "Reyes, lock down the perimeter. I want to know exactly how this happened." Reyes nodded sharply and jogged off. Walker pushed through the smoky corridor, heading straight for the holding cells. Twisted metal bars greeted him, the walls blackened from the blast. Officer Tony Sanders approached, face streaked with soot. "Chief," Sanders said grimly, "most of the detainees are accounted for, but 2 are missing. We think they escaped during the chaos." Walker's hands curled into fists at his sides. "They planned this. The explosion was meant to free them." Sanders nodded. "It looks that way, sir. We're reviewing the surveillance footage, but the blast knocked out several cameras." Walker inhaled slowly, forcing down his frustration. "Double-check every second of footage," he ordered. "Even if the cameras went down, we might catch something before the explosion." "Yes, sir," Sanders said before hurrying off. An hour later, Walker convened his team in what was left of the war room. Power had been restored, but the air hung heavy with tension. Reyes stood by the monitor, pulling up grainy surveillance footage. "This is the best we've got, Chief," she said, adjusting the video. The recording cut off just moments before the blast. Walker leaned over her shoulder, watching as 2 hooded figures slipped into the station through a side entrance. They knew exactly where to go. Reyes said quietly. They avoided patrols and went straight for the holding cells. "Pause it there," Walker instructed. The figures briefly turned toward the camera, but shadows concealed their faces. "Can you enhance that frame?" Walker asked, his voice tight. Reyes adjusted the footage, but the faces remained obscured. "They had help," Walker muttered, stepping back from the screen. Wheeler's eyes narrowed. "You think someone inside the station gave them access?" Walker's expression hardened. "I don't see any other explanation." A heavy silence fell over the room. "We've got a leak," Wheeler said darkly. Walker nodded, his mind already racing. "And we're going to find out who it is." The following day, Chief Marcus Walker sat across from Mayor Robert Alden in the mayor's private office at Brierwood City Hall. Alden's face was pale, deep lines etched by sleepless nights and rising tension. "This town is on the verge of panic, Marcus," Alden said, rubbing his temples. 2 explosions in less than 24 hours, and now suspects have escaped from police custody. "We're handling it," Walker replied firmly. "But I need your support. Whoever's behind this isn't just targeting the department, they're threatening the stability of the entire town." Alden stopped pacing, meeting Walker's gaze with unease. "What do you need from me?" "We need to lock this town down," Walker said. "Increase patrols, enforce curfews in high-risk areas, and keep the public informed, but calm." Alden nodded, though his expression remained tense. "I'll make the calls, Chief, but I expect results." "You'll have them," Walker promised. Back at the station, Walker's team worked at a frantic pace, preparing for the raid on the farmhouse tied to the suspects. Just as they finalized plans, Walker's phone buzzed with an alert. This time, it wasn't a simple text. Walker's breath caught as he opened the message. It was a live video feed. On his screen, his wife Natalie and their daughter Ella sat tied to chairs in a dimly lit room. A masked figure loomed behind them, holding a weapon. The figure's distorted voice echoed through the station's war room. "Chief Walker, you've been a thorn in our side for too long. If you want your family back, call off your investigation. You have 24 hours. The video ended abruptly. Leaving Walker frozen, the image of his family burned into his mind. The war room fell silent, the weight of the moment suffocating. Walker clenched his jaw, forcing himself to remain composed. Officer Reyes broke the silence. "Chief, what's our move?" Walker turned to his team, his voice steady but cold. "We keep going. We find them, and we bring my family home." Sergeant Wheeler gave a sharp nod. "We've got a lead on the farmhouse. It's a long shot, but it's all we've got." Walker considered their options carefully. "We'll split resources. Reyes, take half the team and establish a command center. Monitor the feed. They might slip and reveal a location." Turning to Wheeler, Walker added, "You're with me. We raid the farmhouse. Reyes hesitated. Chief, are you sure about splitting the team? This could be a setup. Walker's gaze hardened. It's a risk we have to take. Time's running out. As the team mobilized, Walker's phone rang. It was Special Agent Doug Harper. Marcus, Harper said urgently. I just heard about your family. I'm dispatching a tactical unit to back you up at the farmhouse. Thanks, Doug, Walker replied, his voice heavy with gratitude. We'll take every bit of help we can get. Be careful, Harper cautioned. Desperate people are unpredictable. I know, Walker answered, but so am I. The drive to the farmhouse was tense. Wheeler sat in the passenger seat, scanning the deserted country roads as Walker drove in silence. The low hum of the engine was the only sound. As they neared the location, Walker switched off the headlights, easing the car to a stop just short of the farmhouse's overgrown lot. Its windows were dark, the structure looming ominously under the pale moonlight. Looks abandoned, Wheeler muttered, inspecting his weapon. That's exactly what they want us to think, Walker replied. He grabbed his radio. Reyes, we're in position. Any updates on the feed? Still tracing it, Chief, Reyes replied. No location yet. Copy that, Walker said, slipping out of the car. We're going in. Walker and Wheeler moved cautiously toward the farmhouse, weapons drawn. The crunch of gravel beneath their boots sounded unnaturally loud against the stillness of the night. Walker signaled Wheeler to cover him, then kicked the front door open. The air inside was stale. Dust particles floated through the dim light as they cleared room after room on the first floor. Each space was empty, filled with nothing but broken furniture and cobwebs. Frustration gnawed at Walker as the last door swung open, revealing more emptiness. Clear, Wheeler said, lowering his weapon. Maybe the tip was bad. Walker's head tilted slightly. A faint sound, barely noticeable, caught his attention. A quiet hum. Walker raised a hand, signaling Wheeler to follow. They traced the noise to the kitchen, where Walker spotted a door tucked away near the back wall. Slowly, he turned the knob, revealing a stairway that led into darkness. As they descended, the hum grew louder, the air thickening as they approached the bottom. At the base of the stairs, they stumbled into a makeshift control room. Monitors lined the walls, flickering with live feeds from around the town. Radios and computers sat atop metal tables, cables running across the floor. Walker's stomach tightened. This wasn't just an operation, this was surveillance on a scale he hadn't anticipated. Wheeler stepped closer to the monitors, his eyes narrowing. They've been watching us? And the whole town. Walker scanned the screens until his gaze landed on one monitor showing a live feed of his own living room. Natalie and Ella were no longer visible, but the room was unmistakable. They're close, Walker said, his voice cold. But not for long. Chief Marcus Walker's eyes locked onto the screen displaying the grainy, paused video of his wife Natalie and their daughter Ella. His pulse quickened as he leaned in. We're close, Walker said, his voice low but urgent. This is their base. Suddenly, footsteps echoed from above. Walker and Sergeant Doug Wheeler exchanged a glance and quickly ducked behind a row of shelves, guns drawn. Two men descended into the basement, rifles slung over their shoulders. Their conversation was hushed but clear in the stillness. The boss wants us to clear out, one muttered. They're getting too close. Fine by me, the other replied. Let's grab the equipment and get moving. Walker didn't wait. He stepped out from behind cover, his gun aimed directly at them. Drop your weapons, now. The two men froze, staring at Walker. One of them shifted, his hand inching toward his rifle. Before he could grab it, Wheeler's shot rang out, grazing the man's shoulder. The rifle clattered to the ground as the second suspect raised his hands in surrender. All right, don't shoot, he stammered. Walker approached slowly, his gun still trained on them. Where are they? He demanded. Where's my family? I don't know, the man stuttered. We don't handle that. We just keep the feeds running. Walker grabbed him by the collar, eyes burning with intensity. Who does? Who's behind this? The suspect hesitated, swallowing hard. You're too late, he whispered. They're already on the move. Before Walker could press further, his radio crackled. Chief, we traced the feed. Reyes's voice came through. It's coming from an old factory on the east side of town. Walker released the suspect, shoving him toward Wheeler. Secure this place and bring them in, Walker instructed as Wheeler called for backup. Walker was already halfway up the stairs. As Walker drove toward the factory, His phone buzzed again. Another video. Walker pulled over briefly, his heart hammering as he opened the file. The footage showed Natalie and Ella, bound and blindfolded, being loaded into the back of a black van. The masked figure from the earlier video stepped into frame, staring directly into the camera. "Time's almost up, Chief," the distorted voice taunted. "If you're not at the factory within the hour, you'll never see them again." Walker's grip tightened on the steering wheel. His resolve hardened. He pressed down on the accelerator. Brierwood streets blurred as Walker sped through the town, the clock ticking louder in his head. "Status update," Walker barked into the radio. "Backup's on the way, Chief," Reyes replied. "ETA, 10 minutes. Walker's tone sharpened. "We don't have 10 minutes. I'm going in." "Understood. We're right behind you." Walker pulled into the factory lot, killing the engine and stepping out quietly, his weapon ready. The air hung heavy, every noise amplified by the tension. The factory doors creaked open as Walker slipped inside, navigating through the maze of rusted machinery and broken pallets. From somewhere deeper in the factory, he heard muffled voices. Walker followed the sound cautiously, moving between the shadows until he reached an open space. A group of armed men stood around a black van. Inside, Natalie and Ella sat bound, their faces pale but fierce. The masked figure barked orders. "Get them out now. The chief won't make it in time." Walker stepped from the darkness, leveling his gun at the group. "You're wrong," Walker said, his voice ice-cold. "Let them go, or none of you leave here." The men spun around, weapons half raised. The masked leader chuckled softly, lowering his rifle slightly. "Ah, Chief Walker, right on schedule, but you're outnumbered. You can't take us all." Walker's expression didn't shift. "I don't need to." Before the leader could respond, the distant crash of doors echoed through the factory. "Drop your weapons." Reyes's voice boomed as her team stormed in. Caught off guard, several of the men hesitated. One lunged at Walker, but he was faster, disarming him with a swift strike. Gunfire erupted in the chaos, but the officers quickly overpowered the remaining suspects. Within minutes, the room fell silent, the last of the men subdued and handcuffed. Walker rushed to the van, his hands trembling slightly as he untied Natalie and Ella. "Are you okay?" Walker asked, his voice thick with emotion. Natalie exhaled shakily, pulling Ella close. "We're fine," she said, though her eyes betrayed the fear she had felt. Walker wrapped his arms around them, holding them tightly. "It's over," he whispered. "You're safe now." "We're fine," Natalie Walker answered, pulling Ella close as she trembled slightly. "But they said they'd kill us if you didn't come." Marcus Walker's jaw tightened, fury simmering just beneath his calm exterior. "They won't hurt anyone ever again." Walker helped his wife and daughter out of the van, his eyes constantly scanning the factory for any lingering threats. But something gnawed at him. The leader was missing. "Reyes," Walker called out, voice sharp. "Do we have eyes on the leader?" "No sign of him, Chief," Reyes replied, signaling officers to fan out. "I'll organize a sweep of the area." Walker nodded, guiding Natalie and Ella toward the waiting police vehicles. Just as he reached the lot, the soft, metallic click of a gun cocking froze him in place. Turning slowly, Walker found himself face to face with the masked figure emerging from the shadows, pistol raised and unwavering. "Did you really think it would end this easily?" The man sneered, pulling off his mask. The face beneath was unfamiliar, but Walker etched it into his memory, knowing this wouldn't be the last time he saw him. "This isn't over," the leader growled, his finger moving toward the trigger. Before Walker could react, a single gunshot shattered the silence. Walker instinctively shielded Natalie and Ella, bracing for the worst. When he looked up, the leader staggered back, clutching his shoulder as blood seeped between his fingers. Reyes stepped from behind a stack of pallets, guns still trained on him. "Drop it," she ordered, voice firm and unyielding. The leader winced but maintained a defiant glare. "You think this changes anything?" He sneered as he let the weapon slip from his grip. "Hands where I can see them," Walker ordered, advancing cautiously. The man slowly raised his hands, blood trickling onto the concrete. "Get him in cuffs," Walker instructed, his tone cold and steady. Sergeant Wheeler moved swiftly, securing the leader's wrists behind his back. As the man was led away, Walker turned to Reyes, his stern expression softening slightly. "Nice shot," Reyes offered a small, grim smile. "Anytime, Chief." Outside, Natalie and Ella sat wrapped in blankets inside an ambulance as paramedics examined them. Walker stood nearby, his eyes never leaving them. Relief mixed with anger burned within him. His family was safe, but the threat to Brierwood lingered. "They're safe," Reyes said quietly, stepping up beside him. "For now," Walker replied, his gaze unwavering. "But this isn't just about them anymore. This entire town's been living in fear, and it won't stop until we take down every last one of these people." Wheeler joined them, his expression serious. "We've got the leader in custody, but he's staying quiet. Typical tough guy routine." Walker nodded, eyes narrowing toward the factory. "He'll talk. They always do." Back at the station, Walker faced the leader in the interrogation room. The suspect sat cuffed to the table, the smirk on his face betraying his fading confidence. "You're wasting your time," the leader said, reclining casually. "Locking me up doesn't stop anything. There are more of us. You'll never stop the movement." Walker leaned in, his voice low and cold. "Your movement ends here. You thought you could terrorize my town and threaten my family and get away with it. But I promise you, every last one of you will fall." The leader laughed softly, but a flicker of doubt crossed his face. "Big talk, Chief," he said, though the bravado was thin. "But you have no idea what you're dealing with." Walker straightened, folding his arms across his chest. "We'll see." As Walker left the room, Reyes and Wheeler waited in the observation area. "He'll break," Walker said confidently. "They always do, once they realize the walls are closing in." "And if he doesn't?" Wheeler asked. "Then we find another way," Walker replied. "This isn't just about him. It's about dismantling the entire network. We've got leads, and we'll chase every single one until Brierwood is clean." In the following days, Walker's team unraveled a complex web of corruption and crime extending far beyond the initial arrests. Using intel gathered from the warehouse and farm, they systematically dismantled key components of the organization. The town, once paralyzed by fear, began to feel the shift. The quiet streets of Brierwood carried whispers of hope, and Walker's leadership restored confidence in the police department. Weeks later, Walker stood on the steps of the Brierwood Police Department, addressing a crowd of reporters and community members. "Today marks a new chapter for Brierwood," Walker declared, his voice resolute. "We faced threats, corruption, and violence, but we stood together and we're stronger because of it." His eyes drifted to the front row, where Natalie and Ella watched him with pride. "This isn't just about one case," Walker continued. "It's about making sure every person in this town feels safe. The fight isn't over, but I promise you, Brierwood's best days are ahead." Applause erupted, echoing down the streets. As the crowd dispersed, Natalie took his hand, squeezing it gently. "You did it," she whispered. Walker smiled, watching Ella laugh nearby. "We did it." And for the first time in months, Walker allowed himself to believe it. Walker's eyes lingered on his wife and daughter, their smiles standing out against the crowd. They were the reason he fought so hard, the reason he refused to back down. "We're not just rebuilding a department," Walker continued, his voice firm and steady. "We're rebuilding trust, and that begins right now." The crowd erupted in applause, the sound echoing through the streets of Brierwood. As Walker stepped back from the podium, a deep sense of closure washed over him. The battle had been long and difficult, but justice had prevailed. He knew there was still work to be done. New threats would rise, and challenges would test him again. But for the first time, Walker felt the tide had turned. Brierwood had changed, and this time, it was for the better.